listen to yourself, because we have our bigger self, our higher self, spirit is communicating with us all the time, especially men in particular. We're not in tune with what is that. So follow your energy. If something makes you excited, do that. Don't overthink it. Just do it. And don't worry about the outcome. If you follow your energy and you stay integrous, you can't help but have success.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Smoke Wallin, who crosses the connection between being a successful business owner and woo.
Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com.
If you're a business owner who can build revenue, survive chaos, and still lie awake at night wondering, is this it? Today's conversation is for you. My guest is Smoke Wallin. He's a CEO, entrepreneur, investor, and serious M&A operator who's led billions in deals and helped founders navigate the hardest moments: partner blow-ups, family business landmines, succession, next-gen tension, and the identity crisis that shows up when you sell your company and realize the money doesn't solve meaning. What makes Smoke different is he can hold the spreadsheets and the soul in the same hand. We talk about what high performance looks like when it's grounded in consciousness, not ego. We go into trauma, awakening, trust, discernment, and why success isn't aligned, eventually collapses, even if the bank account looks great. Let's meet Smoke and see how he does it. Welcome to Richer Soul, Smoke Wallin. It's great to have you join us today.
I'm excited to be here, Rocky. Thank you.
And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, so we were talking offline. I had a lot of very traumatic childhood, and our family lived in scarcity most of my growing up years. So I can remember my mom getting food stamps and not being able to pay the bills and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't learn anything about money other than I wanted to have it. At some point, pretty young, I read like Atlas Shrugged in like 8th grade or something. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I knew I was going to do something in entrepreneurship at some point and never be in the same situation that I was in growing up.
You know, it's surprising, I think, for a lot of business owners and for a lot of successful people, those hard times are somewhat what kind of created or propelled us forward and kind of gave us that resolve to do something different. And I think that's maybe why people are struggling today. Times have been very easy for a lot of people. And so they don't have that, I call it grit. Like, how do you, because that's one of the questions is how do you teach your kids grit when they grow up with wealth? And so it's that back and forth.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, difficult times create character and create capabilities that you would not otherwise develop. I think that's how consciousness learns. You know, we start as one, then separation happens. We have experiences that create separation, whether it's traumatic or not traumatic, it creates separation. And then depending on how you react to that, everyone is different, but you develop skills to compensate for that separation. So for me as a child, like the adults wouldn't listen, people in my life wouldn't listen to me, and I could see, things that were happening that were not right. And as a child, I knew that. So fast forward, I have a podcast. I do public speaking. I've done that my whole business career, but it's like I developed those ability to communicate and to be persuasive and get out in the outside world, partly as a result of not being heard as a child.
Was that something that was kind of an easy switch or an early switch coming out of, I don't know, you went to college and then, or what was that path like?
There was a lot of trauma. So I had a pedophile grandmother who was in on it, and lots of family members that were covering for him. So, I blocked all that out until much later. So I can tell you that story later if you want. But I know I had a fairly traumatic experience and then went off to college and was kind of a lost soul a bit. The things that kept me on track. So I was a wrestler in high school and college. Having to go to practices and be, show up was the only thing that saved my college career. I think it was like late in junior year when I left the wrestling team for a number of reasons. But when that happened, things got worse, for me. Like I had more time and it wasn't a good thing. So I think that it was not an easy transition. And it was like out of necessity, I figured out like, oh, okay, I don't have anyone that I can rely on in the world. And I had to figure out, how do I make it in this environment? And it just developed over time. But, you gain confidence by walking the path. And so I didn't really have confidence, but I just started doing things, and things that worked, I kept doing, and things that didn't work, I stopped doing. And, over time, it developed very extensively.
I think that's the one thing people don't realize. You just show up anyway and you do it without the confidence. The confidence comes later.
Yeah, you got to walk the path to build the confidence. And you don't know that. And that's the scary thing, right? We don't know, is this going to work? Am I going to fail at this or whatever? But by doing it, by walking it, by experiencing it, you build that muscle of confidence. And, over time that I did a lot of entrepreneurial ventures over the years and took a lot of big risks that others would have said, oh, well, why would he do that? Why would he risk everything to do this or that? And, I'm one of those guys that, so my profile in, I forget which one of the things, but it's a fast start profile, which is the big game hunter or entrepreneurial profile. And I was working with a coach and he said, yeah, you're exactly that. I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. He said, the good news is, you are the prototypical like mindset for an entrepreneur. The bad news is we make, because he was that as well. And he said, we make rags to riches a round trip. And so and I was like, oh, that explains quite a few things, because I made on paper anywhere from 50 to less $1 million a few times, and it vanished as well. So I've done that round trip a few times.
That's a Colby test.
Yeah, Colby. Thank you. Of the ones out there, that's one of the ones I like the most, because it's kind of like what you will do in a situation more than just a description.
Yeah, and I find personality tests are very helpful for me to even understand me, which kind of like what you said, it helps you. So I've taken all of them, and then I put them all together and say, where are the things, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? And then I just stay away from my weaknesses, meaning if that's a weakness, I'm not going to try and improve it. Let me find somebody to deal with that part of it so that I don't have to.
A great use of it is just bringing your conscious awareness to how you are. And anyone can kind of overcome those tendencies, but you can't do it unless you're aware of them. So even the things that I'm less good at, by being aware that I'm kind of a mid-level fact finder. So I'm actually higher on fact finder than a lot of fast starts. But if I talk to someone who's a 9 fact finder and I'm a 5, we're talking different languages. Like we're ships in the night. We're not in the same page. And of course, a lot of high fact finders are low on the quick start side of things. They're not very risk-taking people. So that part is even bigger gap. But so understanding that about yourself helps you build the team that you need, because you need fact finders. You know, you want your CFO to be a fact finder, pain in the neck, questioning everything. I mean, it's true. But you don't want that person in a role where they're in charge of strategic vision and what deal we're going to do next, because that's how companies spiral to like stagnation. So it takes both.
You know, it's funny you mention that because we live in a world today where a lot of CFOs end up being CEOs. And so in some senses, it's a mismatch for the reasons that you talked about. The people who are great CFOs, which, you know, in my skill set, I get that because that's where I come from. But I also find sometimes the people across the table don't understand that's the role I'm supposed to play. And so they misunderstand what I'm doing. I'm like, no, this is my role. This is what I'm supposed to do for you, is to make sure that you've got the right things. And I'm showing you all of the gaps, not to say you can't do it, but to say, hey, how do we achieve them, or how do we solve for them before we hit them? And are they worth solving for to begin with? And how does that all come together? And it took me a long time to figure that out and to have confidence in that role.
It totally makes sense to me. And funny, I actually became CFO of our billion-dollar business back in when I was 30 or so, maybe 29. But, you know, I have an MBA in finance and everything. So like, I understand it, but I'm not a CPA and I'm certainly not the right profile. But we had like basically VPs of finance in our couple companies, and they were kind of like prototypical CPAs, did a good job with the basic numbers, but they couldn't speak to a group if their life depended on it. And we were refinancing the company, and we did a high yield deal with DLJ and Bear Stearns and now JP Morgan. And we went out and raised $110 million in the bond market. Well, we had to do a roadshow, and I was the only person on our senior team who knew the numbers and could speak to everybody. So I got to be the CFO because of the roadshow. So I got to check a box, but I was definitely not the typical CFO that you'd want.
You know, that's funny because I love watching Shark Tank. And I just love watching it just to see how people present and how things go. And the number one thing for those road shows, because that's what they are, is when the business owners don't understand their numbers or don't understand their valuation, it's instant like cringe from the sharks. And even now, like I just do the numbers in my head like they do because it's kind of fun. I'm like, oh, I know what's coming. And it just amazes me that they don't coach them ahead of time to say, hey, be ready to answer these questions. Or, you know, that's a crazy valuation. Like, think through what your actual ask is and does it make sense?
Yeah. But I have a good head for numbers. So like I can understand financials and I can speak, and I can answer questions for much of, investors or whatever. And I knew the business well enough to where I could be very precise and, exact with my answers. And so that it worked out well. It was a good experience. I got to raise, a bunch of money. It was a big game changer for our company. And it was, a great stepping stone before I launched a number of my own ventures as a founder and a CEO.
So it sounds like you had relatively early success in life and you were able to do that quickly. Were you able to overcome the childhood or did you just bury it?
It was completely buried. I literally had no memory of it until literally a few years ago when I resurfaced everything. And so but the reality was it was obviously in me. It was in my subconscious, and it manifested in different ways. Anxiety. I was in the liquor industry, but I drank a lot for many years. And I realized when I quit drinking, when I went through kind of my own spiritual awakening and kind of coming to terms with what happened, resolving, kind of getting to a point of clearing the trauma and healing, that I was in a constant state of anxiety, but I was really good at compartmentalizing and covering it up. And when I would drink, like just having a cocktail, like that anxiety would go down. I'd feel normal. And it was like a loud fan going off in the back of my head that would turn off when I drank. Well, when I healed my trauma, the fan turned off by itself and I quit drinking.
You know, if you listen to a lot of coaches who do work on the life coaching side, they all talk about that. They're like, when we work with people and we fix the underlying problems, they don't come to us for drinking, but all of a sudden they stop drinking because it's that reactive thing and you don't realize it, so to speak. I don't think most people necessarily realize their underlying anxiety level because it's their normal. And you kind of get stuck in that zone.
Yeah, I think a lot of awakening is about getting to know yourself and recognizing how you're being reactive to your environment and what's causing that. And once you become aware of it, and you become aware of, we talk about monkey mind in Buddhism traditions, but people have something like 90,000 thoughts a day, and a big number of those are repetitive, like they're rehashing some historical thing and it's going back through your head. Sometimes they're very negative. Sometimes they're very negative against yourself, right? A lot, like we're usually our worst enemies in terms of criticism. Even when you're doing well, you're criticizing everything you're doing, right? And until you recognize that what you think manifests into your reality, you're not even in a position to adjust for that, right? And so a lot of, I think, my spiritual path certainly has been becoming aware of these things, becoming aware that the subconscious is actually probably 99% of the power we have. And if you can bring those issues to your conscious awareness, you can resolve them. And then basically I went through a whole process of reprogramming my subconscious intentionally so that I would manifest exactly what I wanted and not have all the other repercussions that were happening along the way. And it's definitely becoming aware. I think those tests are useful as a starter for that, like the Colby and those kind of things. I did what you did. I took my Colby, my M&amp, which I can't say the word. I took my Myers-Briggs, and then I took my Gene Keys and my Human Design and something else, and I put it all into Grok, and I said, "Tell me about me." It was actually really kind of a fun process. It was a pretty good output, like giving it all that information, which some people don't want to do. But anybody that thinks there's privacy doesn't understand the universe we live in, because there's no privacy. Everything we do, think, or everything is recorded, let alone all the modern electronics and all that stuff. Like, of course, that's being captured everywhere, but the universe is recording everything we do at all times. And so once you realize that, like, okay, well, I don't have anything to hide. I'm an open book, so it doesn't matter to me.
It's funny. On my sales page for our business side, I actually have a page that lists all my different types and what it means to the client for how I can help them so that they better understand me, that they can better utilize the skills that I have. And so I just put it all out there as a page to say, here are all the different things and here's what it means to you. And, again, like you, I don't fuss over it. Was there something that occurred that caused that awakening, or did it just kind of come to be, or how'd that come about for you?
I look back now and retrospectively, I can see points in time where the universe created things for me to wake up. And I was so dogged in my determination or whatever mindset I was in that I would just ignore that and keep going. And so that's hence the repeated, big success, big failure, big success, big failure. And I did it a bunch of times. And I realize now, I was attracting business partners and people in my circle who would betray me. Well, that was because I was betrayed as a child and I was just, I hadn't resolved it. So it was going to keep coming to me one way or another. So I can look back and I can see there were moments in time where clearly if I was a little more aware or less stubborn, I guess, it might have happened earlier. But for me, a real breakthrough happened. I was doing a deal in Nepal, which I finally closed this summer. I sold a brewery to Carlsberg there. So I'm the only person I know that's done a deal in Nepal in the West. But we had a couple days where we got to just tour around. We were seeing the brewery, but then we went to safari, and then we went to Buddha's birthplace. And something happened in that experience there. We did the whole tour and everything. And then we were in the Japanese temple. There's billions of dollars of temples being built all around, where Siddhartha was born. And we were in the Japanese temple, and my friend David Spencer, who's now passed, he knelt down to, give a prayer or meditation or whatever he was doing. I was like, okay, I think I'll do it too. So I knelt down and I was like, what do I want? I'm like, well, I asked the Buddha for peace and love. I have love in my life. I have great kids. I have a great spouse. I have a lot of fun. I have a lot of friends. But something just said to me, it's a different kind of love, a higher level love and peace. And so obviously I had the anxiety thing going on, not in my awareness. And something happened in that temple, and like an electric shock went through my back, up through my head. I guess I would call it, now I didn't know what this was, but like a Kundalini kind of experience. But I had this power went through me. I was like, what was that? I didn't know what it was, but I knew something strange had happened. And then a couple months later, I was going to visit my business partner up in Canada. And he said, I've worked with this resource who's amazing. And would you want to sit with him? He's going to be available when you're here. Would you want to sit with him with plant medicine? And my wife was traveling with me, and we talked about it, and she's like, yeah, let's do it. So we did it together, and we had very different experiences, but it was kind of cracks in the armor of me as a person. And she was sitting there with like angels flying around and like in bliss. I was having like hard labor for 9 hours, eight or 9 hours. And I had a negative spirit entity removed from me. So in Catholic or, religion, they would call it an exorcism. A wind went through the room. Everybody felt it and went out the window. And that was like a big opening. And then so over the next year or so, I did a lot of work and surfaced all these memories and all this stuff. And kind of, I guess when people find out or they break through and they open up a portal where they can start remembering things that were pushed away, I guess you could take maybe more than two, but like one extreme would be, oh, I don't want that drawer open, shove that thing back. I want to go back to my normal life. That's too scary. And the other would be, oh, I need to understand this. Like what I didn't, okay. And dive into it in a big way. I did that. I did the latter. So I was like, I have to remember everything. And so that was a pretty traumatic year of discovering and then reconciling and then integrating, like figuring out how to, because 99% of the work, plant medicine is awesome. It's like, I tell everyone, it's like probably 35 years of therapy would never have gotten me there. But 99% of the work is integration and it's your daily practices. How do you bring the things in what you've discovered into your being and be at peace with that? So I did a lot of work with that. I had some coaches to help me with that. And it's been awesome. But besides living here in Sedona, which you can see is a great place, but the reason I live here is that journey. And I'm in peace and joy at all times now. And the normal challenges that we all have doesn't bother me in any way. So I guess it was abrupt, but then it was like intensive for a while, and it's never stopped. Like I continue to evolve and learn things, but the core trauma, which Yvonne, who was my coach there, Yvonne Rados, he's a very incredible resource. He said, before we started the journey, he looked at me and he said, and he had us write down all the things that we want. And I had a whole list of things like, I want good things for my kids and for the world and this and that and everything. And he said, okay, none of that matters, but you wrote peace and love at the top. That's what you focus on. I'm like, okay. And he said, he's like, I can see you don't trust people. And I'm like, I think I do. Yeah, no, I trust people. He's like, no, you don't. And he said, and you don't trust yourself. And I'm like, oh, really? How do you know? What are you talking about? And then we went into the medicine and did this whole journey. And turns out, yeah, well, actually, yeah, I didn't trust anybody and I didn't trust myself because of the experiences I had. And as I resolved those things and got healing by forgiving, forgiveness is for the forgiver, not the forgiven. You get your freedom by forgiving. And as I did that, and no one told me that, I just innately knew that I made a deal with my higher self, I guess. And I said, and the deal was, if I can remember, if I can get the specifics, I need to know what happened, I'll forgive. And somehow I just knew that. And that was like this key that unlocked everything. Because I guess, spirit won't reveal things that you're not ready to receive. And, even though it was highly traumatic, it was like I showed myself to be ready. The biggest thing I would say is help is available to everyone, but you have to ask for it. So I opened up this portal of asking for help at Buddha's birthplace, and everything unfolded after that. But it was like, I had to say, Buddha, help me. And, if you want peace and love, everything that's between you and peace and love will come up. So that's the shadow side, that's the trauma and everything else. So the things I had to experience and reconcile and get clear on were all the things that were keeping me from that.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. Plant medicine has this ability to show you the mirror and take away all your blinders. Just go, here you are. You wanted to see? I'll show you what you wanted to see. And it does that. But like you said, that's step one. And once you see, you have to do all the work afterwards of clearing things out, of letting things go, and essentially reprogramming yourself in the way that you behave.
Yeah. And Rocky, I mean, you think about it, we are the cumulative, energetic buildup of all of our thoughts and actions up to now. And it's just like I go back to sports and we'll talk about kids and how you get them motivated when you have wealth. Because I have 4, great kids who I would call them all successful in different ways. But it goes back to like the habits that you and the way you operate day to day. So in wrestling, I mean, I'll argue with anybody. It's, there's no harder sport, to like, if you really want to be a good wrestler, like you have to do the work. And if you add in, you have to make weight. There's nothing harder for a teenager to not eat, but the discipline that you learn in being able to do that, being able to make weight and work out and be there for a match and do your homework and all that stuff, that matters, right? And so I was able to apply that kind of discipline to my entrepreneurial ventures, my business life. I did it very successfully in lots of different, arenas. But when I started this spiritual awakening, I was like, oh, you mean there's all this other stuff that I wasn't paying attention to, wasn't aware of. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, what do I have to do? I basically reverse engineer, like, what do I need to do to clear the stuff and to integrate? And that means daily practices. And it's like, it's literally having a routine that that is conducive to what you want the outcome to be. So for me, it was instead of watching violent action movies like I used to watch, and your subconscious doesn't know the difference between a murder on TV and a murder in person. It can't tell the difference. And so you watch all this stuff and it's going into your subconscious. It's not good for you. I was like, okay, I need to clear this stuff out. I need to start daily practices. I started reading all kinds of books and spiritual material, and I would play Audible and I'd leave it on at night. I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up when I needed to hear something. I did that for years now. And I just reprogrammed, allowing nothing negative to come into my subconscious. And if it did, declaratively getting rid of it, cleansing, and having a daily practice, which is, for me, it's meditation. It's contemplate. Really, my meditation is still a real practice, but it's turned into more being contemplative throughout the day. It's not just a little window. It's like actually being in a, we're in this interview. I'm doing your podcast. I'm fully present, and I'm aware that I'm sitting here in Sedona. I'm on the earth. I'm conscious of the bigger thing. That's being contemplative. It's not just being totally stuck in the moment, the Maya of the moment. But having that discipline, having that approach, people would say it was miraculous, but no, it's not. It's like little things every day add up to change your entire life.
Were there some books or some people that you learned from that were super helpful to you?
A lot. Early on, there was a little religion, but it was like the cover for my grandfather. He was the organist in churches, and my grandmother was, teaching Sunday school and stuff. So that was their cover for his behaviors. So I didn't grow up in a religious environment, and anything related to religion was kind of negative to me. So when I started becoming aware, I'm like, oh, wow, there's a whole lot more, God is real, source is real. Okay. So okay, I had huge gaps. On the one hand, it was a disadvantage, but I think actually it was a big advantage because I didn't have a lot of dogma or a lot of stuff that was beaten into my early system. So I was kind of open-minded about everything. So I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Upanishads, I read the Dhammapada. I've now read, probably in the last 3 years, 400 books of different spiritual nature. They've all been helpful in different ways. And a lot of them have been more helpful as I come back to them and read them later. As I advance myself, I was like, oh, you get new meanings out of everything. But I would say if there's one author and body of work that was the most helpful to me, it would be David Hawkins' Power versus Force, and his other, dozen books that he wrote. I guess there was 9 original ones, and there's been a lot of new stuff come out, but those are from lectures. But his core teachings, here you had a guy, he ran the largest psychiatric practice in the country, probably in the world. He had 50 doctors on staff. They would see 2,000 patients a year, and this is in New York. The worst of the worst psychiatric patients, they would send to him because no one could get results, and he had all this crazy results happening. And he became enlightened while he ran that practice. And so he had a complete discovery, and he was like, okay, so now he became this elevated guy. Well, at some point he was like, okay, I'm checking out. He left the practice, left his big thing there, and he moved to Sedona. And I think he spent like a couple decades just like, or maybe at least a decade, just meditating and being a hermit, essentially, with his newfound realization. But eventually, he was called to write about it. And so Power versus Force was the first book. I think he published in like 95. And then he had a whole bunch of books subsequent to that. But that, for me, as a logical, business-oriented MBA kind of person, I like to understand things. I like to have a plan and, all that kind of stuff. And Hawkins brought the knowledge of modern psychiatric practice and was enlightened. So his words, in my mind, are the best for today, because when you read the Dhammapada, the beautiful teachings, awesome. The Upanishads, amazing. Bhagavad Gita, so many great lessons in it. but they were written thousands of years ago, translated by multiple handoffs. And while the core truths are still very high in those works, the cultural and the timing, the level of consciousness of society, humanity was very low when the Buddha was around. It was very low when Jesus was around and they killed him. The Buddha happened to be in the East, so that it was a more accepting culture to, they had a tradition of enlightened beings. And when Jesus was born, they didn't have that framework in the West, and so they killed him. But in any case, I find Hawkins' work to be the most useful, and it gives a really good framework for understanding consciousness and these energy levels and all the things that the attractions and aversions that we have to transcend with our ego mind in order to awaken to the bigger picture.
It's interesting. You're in the world of mergers and acquisitions. You're in the world of business, making money and doing all of that. And yet on the other side, there's this old spiritual side and this consciousness side. How have you found that coming together? And then how is that kind of related as you talk to people there? Because usually most people in that world are not very conscious, so to speak. But yet you've found a way to bridge it.
Yeah. I mean, it's changing though, Rocky. I mean, I've been in YPO for 23 years or so. That's a fairly high calibrating group, like Genius Network. It's people that all want to do better. Like, generally speaking, they're open. They want to learn. They want to be better leaders. They want to be better husbands, better father, family member, better. So it's a group that has a positive energy field already. But what I'm seeing in the last 5 years is more and more people are waking up to, I've had all this financial success. I've checked all the boxes of all these things. I can go do 10 more deals and make a lot more money. But is there something more? And so I think I've been more willing to express that, with my podcast and just my talks and, keynotes I've done, where I've spoken directly about spirit and about what this reality is and why it's so important. But I also have one foot in the business world, and I do M&A because it's fun. I help entrepreneurs exit their companies around the world, and we're really, really good at it. And I look at it as completely consistent with my spiritual work. And I would say half my job is actually selling the company. The other half is coaching and holding the hand of the CEO and through the ups and downs of the deal process. And most of these guys that are having exits in 100 million, 500 million, whatever, starting to think about what's next? How do you turn success to significance? What is meaningful to you and your family? And be thinking about that before the exit, because I'm sure you have same friend group, but I mean, there's so many examples of people who built a great business, had a big exit. Now they have all the money in the world and they have all the time on their hands, and their life falls apart. They lost their meaning. They lost their spouse is over them, and their kids are dysfunctional or whatever. I mean, all kinds of issues that people have, and they just had this great exit. Well, because we have to channel this energy. Money is just energy to a higher purpose. And once people understand that, then you're in alignment and you're in flow, and you can continue to be in business and make money and whatever. But I'm not doing it because I don't need 2 houses. I don't need a jet. I mean, I wouldn't mind a jet, but I don't need one. There's nothing else I'd want. I mean, there's nothing I need. There's nothing I want. And so any money I make is just, all right, how do I help? I've co-founded Dignity Moves, which is our homeless initiative in California. We've got, I think, 22 villages being built. I think a dozen or more are already built. We've helped thousands of homeless people get off the streets. And then I'm also a member of the board of Sacred, which is who are helping families who have children who have sexual abuse. And usually the breadwinner is the person who, it's stepfather or somebody, is usually the culprit. And the mom all of a sudden wakes up to the reality of, not only has my child been sexually abused, but I just lost our income with the family, and what am I going to do? And so Sacred basically gives funding to families directly who have an experience like that, and to try to get them through the next month or two, right? Like it's very small but meaningful. So as I continue in business, I'm doing good work, helping entrepreneurs realize their value, but also like I'm able to put some of my resources to work in helping other people. And that's kind of, it's again, alignment and flow.
I'm looking at the calendar and I'm realizing it was almost 10 years ago that we came up with the seeds of this. And back then it was, you got rich, now what? Because the money isn't going to make you happy. And what is it that's really going to drive that? And the question that I find most people struggle with answering is, how much is enough? Because even if they do have the successful exit, it always seems like they don't know anything but more. And they haven't taken the time to think about, what does my life really mean, and to go through these types of exercises and to actually stop and look around and say, hey, what is the purpose of all of this? And I think you're right. I think I've noticed a lot more in the last few years of the shift coming. And I see it a lot. I mean, I hang out in the entrepreneurial community like you, and I see it a lot in the entrepreneurial community at all different levels. People, for lack of a better term, waking up and starting to challenge and ask those questions. And it's becoming far more mainstream to do that and to explore it and figure it out. And I think people struggle with the concept of, how do they go together? And I've always said money and woo can intersect perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Money is neutral. Sex is neutral. Power is neutral. It's our attractions, our attachments to those that are the problem. So once you don't care about money, don't care about sex, don't care about power, you can experience money and sex and power and keep it in perspective and not be attached to it. So when we drop our attachments, and I like non-attachment better than detachment, because you're living in the world. It's all energy, and detachment to me sounds like, oh, you're really separate from everything. Non-attachment to me means I can fully enjoy the physical world. I can fully enjoy the human experience and keep it in perspective, and I'm not attached to it. And so once you get to that point, it's like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't control you. And that's really, happiness comes when we get to that. There's no number amount, there's no number of deals or power or whatever. There's no, like, none of that. If that's external and it's never going to make anyone happy, happiness comes from within and being aligned with spirit. And if we have that and we're unattached to all the external things, we can still experience them and enjoy them in flow with spirit. And that's really what everyone should be getting to at some point.
It's not easy. And also finding the groups. And again, like you talked about, you read 400 books. So it does take doing your own research and investing your time and effort into what works for you. And thankfully today, I think now more than ever, a ton of this information is available online. A lot of it is available for free. And you've got to figure out what resonates with you, because not everything is going to unlock your key, right?
No, it's a great point. I mean, the challenge historically was, are you in a tribal society of some kind where they recognize spirit tendencies early, where they have a tradition, like, in the East, there's a lot more tradition of that. And if a young child showed some propensity to that, they would get channeled into the monastery or to, whatever the church. And if you didn't live in a place that had that knowledge or that wisdom, you were just kind of on your own. And so historically, the enlightened beings of the world have been in one tradition or another, right? They grew up in Buddhism or the non-dual, Hinduism or Christianity. I'm a big fan of Meister Eckhart and Teresa of Avila and Cloud of Unknowing. So a lot of the great Christian mystics over time, but they were in their tradition. And now the challenge is exactly what you said. We have access to everything. So you can pull from all the best traditions. And it's almost the problem is sorting through it and finding what resonates with you and what's also truthful. Because there's a lot of, one of Hawkins' books is called Truth versus Falsehood. It's an amazing book. And basically there's, at least half of the spiritual material out there is false. It's based on false premises. It's been negative entities have been involved in some way, and they've been able to invert some of the teachings. It's like a spiritual carnival. The carnival is fun, but there's like a lot of roads that don't lead to unity and flow and source. They're distractions. And so our challenge in this day and age is not living in a monastery. It's living in the world. It's being selective about the material that we absorb, whether that's watching TV or it's listening to whatever, or it's reading what books you read, and picking integrous works that move you toward where you want to be. And that's what I've spent a lot of time on. I'm like, my forthcoming book is a little recap of my journey. And part of it is like, I don't think most people are going to read 400 books, but like I've kind of sorted through like what makes sense, what's truthful and what's not. And not for everyone, but it'll be at least it's like an entrepreneur's guide to spiritual awakening. So if you took the entrepreneur lens and you applied it to this, that's what I'm trying to convey.
And there's a lot more of that coming out. I know Gino Wickman wrote Shine, again, similar type of book from his viewpoint. And more, I think these types of things are coming out. And these conversations are happening more and more. We met at Genius Network. I'm kind of new to that, but it also seems to be the culture there to talk more about these types of things and to have these types of conversations because they're more about that holistic looking at how it all comes together.
Yeah. I mean, it really speaks to the importance of, we have our own journey, but then we're influenced by the groups and the people we surround ourselves with. And a lot of times people who begin waking up and realizing there's more, like their current situation may not be conducive to it. It's like as a kid growing up in poverty, you end up with friends, you end up shoplifting or stealing plants from neighbors or something and giving to your mom. I don't know. I heard that happens. And, one thing leads to another. You go to juvenile because you get caught on something. Your friend group they've all committed crimes. You come out. Now you're moving on to the next level of crime. Maybe you end up in jail. You got the next level of friends. So your probability of getting out of that situation goes down over time, but it's low because of the energetic field you're in, the friend group, the people doing it. So, for me, as one of the most positive things was the Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout. The wrestling team, that taught me a lot of discipline. There are things like that had a huge influence on me. I had a stepfather who, we did landscaping and masonry work and built waterfalls and stuff. And I was like a slave laborer for years for him. But I learned work. I learned how to go put in a 10 or 12 hour day of hard labor and not complain and just figure it out. And so who you're with and the groups you're with. So fast forward, Genius Network, Joe Polish has done an amazing job putting a group of like-minded entrepreneurs together. YPO is another example. EO is another example. But like these are people who are inherently successful at some level. They're go-getters, and they're also like trying to better themselves. And usually they want to better themselves and the people they're with. And so those energy fields are actually quite high, and they help you stay high. So you gotta be surround yourself with people and groups who calibrate highly, who are integrous, and are doing good works. It doesn't have to be enlightenment, but it needs to be positive. And you become the groups and the people you associate with. So that's is a really important thing, I think, for everyone. But that's why I love Genius. I love YPO. Those are just fantastic groups that are, everyone's there to help each other.
I love them too. It's the reason I've joined them, and I have friends in all of these different places. And yeah, they're all stepping up, and because they're in a group that's stepping up, they see those opportunities, and it opens them up to bring about change and improve themselves and figure out what they truly want out of life. And I think that's phenomenal. I'm just glad to have to been a part of so many of them.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's why the 12-step groups work, right? So it's very hard for people to quit, drinking or whatever, drugs or whatever it is. But these groups calibrated at a 540 on Hawkins scale, which is unconditional love. That field is so powerful that if you stay in the field, you can quit drinking no matter how bad of an alcoholic you were or whatever. Like it works. But when people leave the group, and if they haven't done all the work and totally, raised their own level of consciousness to a certain level, invariably they end up falling down and recurring, getting back into drinking and whatnot. So like the power of groups is really incredible. And like, so I want to touch on real quick the kid thing that you mentioned earlier. In success, how do we make sure, like my kids were never going to have the trauma that I had, because even though I didn't remember everything, I knew I had to create a safe space. So I was doing the things that had to be for them to be safe. And we had great resources. So, they I didn't go to Europe until after college, for a business trip. And these kids have, been everywhere around the world. They've gotten to fly private, all this stuff, right? So they've done, and their friend group is like that, right? Because that's who we were around. But things like sports, things like debate, things like scouts. I have 2 Eagle Scout sons, which is frankly a much bigger accomplishment than getting my own Eagle Scout, right? And we hiked all over the country. We went to Appalachia Trail. We went to Rocky Mountain National Park. We did Alaska, Wrangell St. Elias. We did these incredible adventures. And if there's one thing they remember growing up, it's like, that was when Dad didn't have it. Cell phone didn't work. We were out camping for 7 to 14 days. And it was like deep experiences. So things like that make a big difference. And, if you are a helicopter parent and you aren't engaged with your kids, taking them on camping trips or whatever, sports is another good way. I never made anyone pick a sport, but if you picked one, you had to finish the season. That was my only rule, is like, you can't quit mid-season. So you're on the basketball team, you're on the baseball team, you don't like it, you don't like coach, you don't like the whatever, that's fine. After the season, you don't have to do it next year. But we don't quit in the middle of it. And little things like that make a big difference.
And we did very much the same with our kids, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, getting those awards and giving them a little bit of grit, and also being there as they were involved in those different activities and being on the sidelines with them so that they could learn not so much the activity, but how to grow as people and how to deal with all the situations and having that mentorship. So that's awesome that you did that as well. And that's what you have to do. That's what being a parent is all about. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
True success comes from who you are, your energetic being, which is the accumulation of everything you do, think, and, put out there. And so there's lots of other societal measures of success, but actual success is alignment with God.
That's what they call karma, right?
Karma's real.
What's a lesson that cost you a lot but was worth every penny?
I have so many. um, well, so in retrospect, so I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I was attracting the energetic field that I was. So I was a risk taker. I was willing to, I had great big ideas. I did .com. I did all these different ventures, raised lots of money, got lots of people involved. I tended to end up like attracting the wrong kind of investors, the wrong kind of partners. Not every time, but like, I had enough of them to go, okay, I'm like, it obviously was something I was energetically putting out so that I would have to learn some lessons. So lost a lot of, money on paper due to my lack of discernment in who I did business with, but mainly because I wasn't where I needed to be. That's all changed. So now I don't take on M&A clients who aren't calibrating quite integriously like that. Like I check, it's like, nice to meet you. This is not something I'm going to be able to do for you. But by having that lens, all my deals are happening the way they need to happen. And they're just, they're integrous and no business is easy. Selling a company is one of the hardest things you can do and do it right and come out on the other end intact, feeling good about it, all that stuff, no matter how much money it is. So you have ups and downs. You want people that are not going to stab you in the back when there's a down, because it's going to happen.
And that's a big part of it. You attract what you will accept, and knowing that and being aware of it and changing who you are is a big part of it. You've got kids, young people. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Follow your energy, pursue your dream or whatever that is, but like listen to yourself, because we have our bigger self, our higher self, spirit is communicating with us all the time, but we're not, especially men in particular, we're not in tune with what is that. So everything is just energy. And so emotions, feelings, whatever. So follow your energy. If something makes you excited, do that. Don't overthink it. Just do it. And don't worry about the outcome. If you follow your energy and you stay integrous, you can't help but have success.
And a big part of that is listening to yourself and your doubts and your fears and all those things that you tend to have at a young age, and just going through it anyway. If people would like to learn more about you, check out your podcast and so forth, how do they find you?
Well, Rocky, I'm kind of easy to find because I'm the only guy named Smoke. It's actually my real name. But smokewallin.com is my main website. But the Smoke Trail is my journey of awakening and invited guests who we have conversations like we're having now. And so it's all about trying to have good conversations that can be helpful to people that are on their own journey, and, take what makes sense and don't take what doesn't resonate. So the Smoke Trail, we probably have the most followers on YouTube, but it's on Spotify and Apple and all the other podcast networks. But smokewallin.com is easy. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Smoke Wallin there. Pretty easy to find.
And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Rocky. I enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we could do it again.
One closing thought. When you return to stillness, you remember you are not separate. And from that place, the next step becomes obvious. If this episode served you, share it with one person who might benefit. And if you want practical profit and cash flow side of freedom, check out the Profit Answer Man. See you next time. Have an abundant week.